What's going on, everybody? It's Blake Bowman here with the Blake Bowman Podcast. Today's episode is all about back pain, particularly the experiences of Dr. Eric Goodman, who's my guest today. Eric's worked with a bunch of high-profile clients, including Matthew McConaughey, Chris Hemsworth. Basically, he fixed his own back pain, and now he teaches his clients and patients to do the same using his methods known as foundation training. And that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoy it. Hey Eric, so thank you for being on, man. I really appreciate you coming on here and taking the time out of your day to speak with me.
Yeah, no problem. It's a pleasure, and I love doing these things. I can't believe people are willing to listen to anything I have to say. Great,
yeah,
thank you.
You have a lot of insight. So why don't you start off by telling everybody a little bit about your background and what ultimately made you decide to go to chiropractic school and then start foundation training.
All right, let's see. Where should I start? Well, I've always wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid. I think that was just kind of the right way of life for me. I met a lot of different types of doctors, not just doctors, but like physical therapists and massage therapists, people that saw a real joy in caring for other people.
Yes.
And I just liked the way they got through life, and I thought the coolest thing in the world was that they would go places and people were excited to see them. They loved running into their chiropractor. They loved running into their PT or their trainer or their MD, whatever. It was a very respected human in general.
Yes.
And I liked that. And that might not be the case always with doctors, but in my case, in my eyes, they're very well respected. And I felt like, all right, I could probably make a really cool living out of something in that field. And this is when I was like 15, 16, figuring out college and all that. So I went that route. I went to college, pre-med, decided on chiropractic school because of several reasons. The holistic health reasons, for sure. I was already working in chiropractors' offices. I was already really a hands-on person. I was a personal trainer. I was thinking about the body all the time. I was in so many anatomy classes and things. So the chiropractic field makes sense, but also because I have the attention span of a 10-year-old, and I could see chiropractic school as something that was engaging. I'm going to learn about the body. I'm going to have my hands on things. I'm going to have people's hands on me. I'm going to feel what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I'm not just going to learn about chemistry. So that was a really influential thing in my life, was that I'm not a very good student or a very good learner, but I'm really into this idea of the body and what it could do. So chiropractic was unreal. And I realized how freaking hard it was. I was going through school, and it's like medical school. It is medical school. So, that smacked me in the face a little bit, and you don't realize you're studying 10, 12 hours a day, or you're in school for like 8 to 10 hours a day. Then you're studying for another 2 to 4 to 6 or 8 hours at night, depending on what's going on, for 4 years, and nonstop. And it becomes a full-time career plus some. And the little tiny back injuries that I had in college, and in playing in sports, I played water polo, I played ice hockey for many years. I just never really noticed them until in chiropractic school. I was sitting for all those hours, and it just started seizing up. And so foundation training, to take that long story and make it quick, all of a sudden I found myself with a really solid amount of biomechanical and anatomical knowledge from chiropractic school, and was also suffering the physical consequences of having learned all of that stuff in a seated position for so many hours a day, while in a school to become a professional that helped people avoid the exact thing I was suffering from. It was an interesting time in life. It was a very interesting time.
You gotta love that irony.
Yeah. Well, the best thing in the world is, like, I can look at it now and I'm all calm, I'm all relaxed. I've got a successful business now.
Yes.
But man, it felt like crap back then. Like, it's the scariest time of your life when you're about to be a couple $100,000 in debt from becoming a doctor, and you might not be able to practice because it hurts so bad.
Yeah.
And that was an interesting time. So it took me several years. What you see now as foundation training has evolved and continues to evolve, and I hope will evolve forever into a better and better program. But it's that, man. It's my chiropractic education, my experience wanting to help people, regardless of a title or anything like that, and my requirement of having to do something every single day for my own spine to make sure that I don't have to get fusion surgery, which has been recommended on a couple occasions now.
Yeah.
And it works. And, my stuff is powerful, and I'm I'm really blown away at what people are getting out of it, myself included, and it just makes me really happy.
Absolutely,
so
man.
That's foundation training right there.
Yeah. So yeah, what can you just dig a little bit deeper into what foundation training is? If somebody's listened to this and they've never heard of foundation training, and you had to like kind of give them an elevator pitch, what is foundation training?
All right. Well, the first thing to think of is the position that most of us find ourselves in every day, which is seated or something similar to being seated, a cell phone in front of us, a computer in front of us, a book in front of us, something in front of us. So we're just rounded forward, head drooping forward. Foundation training is the best answer available to that posture, to that crappy, lackadaisical, suffocated human posture that is becoming epidemic around our society and many other societies.
Yes.
Foundation training is a posterior chain, meaning back of the body exercise. It's going to integrate the muscles that line from heel to head on the back side of your body, teaching them to be very supportive, have a lot of muscular endurance, and perpetually get stronger and stronger the more you learn to use them.
Yes.
There's no anything other than body weight. It's just your body resisting itself against gravity, or with gravity, however you want to think of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not complex. The process of getting to it was extremely complex and long and a pain in the ass, but the process of doing it is not very complex. It takes a week or two to learn. You have to learn something called decompression breathing, and you have to learn something called anchoring the pelvis, and those are our two main principles.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've learned the exercises that teach you that, you can start integrating these poses into your life without much time, 5-10 minutes a day. They're very challenging poses, as anybody that does them well will tell you. It'll be one of the hardest things you've done for about, a few minutes at a time.
Yes.
And the more you do it, the more likely it becomes a base movement pattern for you. It reminds your hip joints that they're made for a movement called hip hinging.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds your neck that it's meant to be held high with your chin above your chest, not in front of it. These are all muscular things that you can tell somebody to stand up straight. You can tell somebody to sit up straight. You can tell them to pull their shoulder blades down and back, or whatever the most simple posture advice you can give is.
Yes.
But what we do with foundation training, what we do is we teach the body how to hold those positions without any thought or any reminder.
Mm-hmm.
We strengthen the muscles that are solely responsible for that purpose.
Yes.
And I tell you, it's really hard to do.
Yeah.
There's nobody that is going to learn this work that is going to have an easy go at it. Nobody.
I can personally attest to that after working on my founder.
I wish I could be like, oh, if you guys do this 1 minute a day once, you're going to be great forever. But that's not life.
No.
That's not how it works. So, you got to spend 5-10 minutes a day at the bare minimum practicing decompression breathing, practicing posterior chain integration postures like the founder and several others. We've got about 20 postures that are public right now.
Yeah.
20 exercises and a lot of crazy new materials coming out next year. I can't wait.
Dude, I'm excited. But yeah, Eric, I talk about a lot of the same things. I teach my students how to basically go through corrective exercises to get rid of that tissue restriction, to get activation in the posterior chain, things that will alter their structure and the length tension relationships in their myofascial network so that they're moving better. But one thing that you said on your website is it's important to treat movement patterns and like muscular imbalances associated with back pain instead of just taking painkillers, which is just like trying to address things on like a chemical level, your chemistry, whereas you're concerned about like changing the way people move and changing their movement patterns and the activation that they get in their muscles, right?
That's definitely the biggest focus. The biggest focus is to recreate a natural neural pattern, a natural movement pattern that generates movement from the hip joint primarily as the primary fulcrum of the body, as the rest of the body is held really powerfully and reasonably symmetrically away from that central hip joint. But that doesn't make sense to anybody, and you got to realize, we know that. That doesn't make sense to anyone to just say that.
Yes.
So what we have to do is we have to make them feel what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
You can't explain to somebody well enough to get them to not take painkillers or not get surgery. What you have to do is you have to say, listen, try this. You put them in a posture that supports their spine completely, supports their hip joints completely, makes them feel the arches of their feet connect all the way up to their groin, make them feel their pelvis connect all the way up to the back of their head and feel powerful. that person's not going to get surgery if you can turn their pain off quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we try to do. That's our main focus, is to let people feel how strong they actually are, even when they have a lot of these chronic injuries and chronic pains.
Yeah.
So you don't want to take chemistry for that. Back pain's a really complex thing, and we treat a lot of different stuff. We work with a lot of different types of body injuries. Back pain obviously being the most common, because it is the most common. It's really complex, though. There's mental processes going on. There's digestive processes going on. You never know if your body's inflamed from a zillion other reasons, and that it's expressing an injury that you've had for years in a disc herniation,
yes,
and just didn't realize until you're like, there's just a lot of mechanisms at play. So
mm-hmm.
I don't want to discredit the reality that the medical system needs to exist in this world and in this back pain world. But certainly, as far as chronic pain, chronic inflammation, movement pattern breakdowns that lead to herniations, lead to head pain, neck pain, and headaches, and constipation, and back pain, and sciatica, that shit needs to be addressed at the root. Because if you don't address it at the root, you're masking everything that
mm-hmm.
it presents with.
Yeah.
You're just masking it. You're pretending it's not there, but hey, it's there, and it's going to get worse when you're pretending.
Yes. Yeah, I'm thoroughly convinced that anybody that is, a candidate for any type of surgery, or addressing their chemistry via like opiates and things like that, they need to consult people like you, and identify the postural distortions that they have in the movement patterns, the movement pattern deviations that they have, because you can tear your rotator cuff, and you can have a surgeon go in there and repair it, and that surgeon is not going to ask why it tore in the first place, why you had this like soft tissue injury like manifest itself in the first place. They're just going to fix it, and then you're likely going to go back to the same routine, same movement patterns that caused it to tear in the first place. So
one of the worst things that I think I see injuries from are chronic pains that are masked for a few years, sometimes even like 5-10 years with prescriptions. Oh man, when you get off that stuff and you realize what your body has done by desensitizing itself to a very heavy, impactful degenerative pattern, it's unreal. You basically went from something that is completely fixable to something that now requires hefty surgeries and maybe even hefty prescriptions for months on end.
Exactly.
To remediate.
Yeah.
The problem is if you haven't fixed your movement pattern prior to that, not only do you have to remediate the injury, the unstable tissue, the spinal injury or the joint injury, whatever, the hip, the knee, the ankle, but now once you've done that, you have to also retrain the movement pattern, or else that's going to come right back with ferocity.
Yep.
Real ferocity.
Yeah. I think
the body doesn't mess around when it goes bad.
Yeah. I think people can even mask things with things that are considered natural or alternative too, like taking massive quantities of like anti-inflammatory herbs like turmeric and ginger, things like that.
I will say though, there is a lot to be said for decreasing the overall inflammation in the body.
Yes.
Most injuries are going to present as a result of inflammation, whether it's acute or chronic. Something is happening to inflame. Mm-hmm. If you're taking an anti-inflammatory, you can mitigate a lot of that. However, if you're doing that without utilizing corrective exercise, you're only doing half the battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're going to put yourself, it's not numbing yourself, by the way, when you're taking nutritive anti-inflammatories. If you're taking a bunch of bromelain and things like that, you're doing great things for your body
mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways. But what you're doing also is providing an environment in which you can comfortably practice better movement, and you should.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Eric, I know that in your book you talked about, and you spoke about it a little bit here today, but when you're going through chiropractic school, and you kind of dug into this a little bit more in your book, but the pain that you were dealing with was like really bad. You were diagnosed with degenerative disc disease, and did you say you had some like herniations too?
Yeah, I've got about a dozen herniations in my spine, maybe more. Yeah, I don't know. I got a lot, but they're really protected now, man. They are just enveloped in muscle from doing these. It's unreal what a strong back will do for you.
Yeah,
I didn't experience it in my life until I was like in my early 30s, and I'm still just very new to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was meant to have 2 levels of fusion surgery: my L4 to L5 and my L5 to S1. My last lumbar vertebra, L5, is actually in my S1. It is impacted into the lower vertebra below it.
Wow.
And my L4 is on top of my L5. There's no disc in between anymore or anything like that. As you go up the chain, L4, L3, L2, L1, like it's not good. I got a really messed up back, and I lifted way too many weights with really bad form. I put a lot of emphasis on being a big, strong guy for about 10, 15 years of my life when I was 15 to about 25, so 10 years of my life.
Yeah.
And it didn't do that good for me. You know, it made my arms really strong, and I had big pecs, and
yeah,
I was a big dude. I was scary looking, but I'm remodeling myself since then for the past 10 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you know who Dr. Rupsi Hoda is? He's a physical therapist.
No, I don't.
He's a physical therapist. He works with Kelly Starrett out of San Francisco.
Yeah, I know that. I know who that is. They're doing cool work.
Absolutely. Yeah, he was talking about how it takes approximately 7 months for like a full fascial remapping to happen. So like what you just said kind of like reminded me of that. Like
you gotta understand, those guys know so much more about the body than I do, for real. Like I have one small piece of understanding, which is the specific biomechanics that help my spine that happen to help a lot of other people. When you get to guys like Kelly Starrett, girl like Katie Bowman, the guy you're talking about, that's a whole different ballgame. They have been studying biomechanics as a science for their lives, whereas I have been feeling my way through the subject matter for about a decade.
Yes.
And so just, so people understand, because I get on these podcasts and I think I do have a lot to say in one regard, but I think they have a lot more to say about the body as a whole. And I think that should be known. Like those people are very good to listen to.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast are kind of plugged into those people. A lot of them are plugged into you. I consider you more of like a, you're like the beacon of hope for people that have back injuries. I can't even tell you how many people I know, and I know you run into people like this too, Eric. People diagnosed with degenerative disc disease. The first thing that they do is they see a surgeon, and then they're scheduled to have an operation done, a couple months later. And it doesn't always have to be that way, and that's...
I'll tell you what, man. If you come into this foundation training work from most places, from most bodies, even if they've been injured for their whole lives, the process of what I call re-educating the axial skeleton, which is taking the center of our structures, the center of our vertebral and rib cage, and expanding them, and then taking our base structure, our appendicular skeleton, the legs, the limbs, taking those and re-educating them is going to help anybody. And that's 100% what foundation training does. We re-educate the system of the body as a whole. And I simply, if that is the beacon of hope, it should be. It's accurate. It should give hope. But people need to understand that hope comes with a lot of effort on their behalf. And it is a re-education, a real one, like learning a language. Luckily, the language of movement requires a lot less like memory than Spanish or French or Chinese or Mandarin or whatever. You just have to repeat it though. You got to do a little bit every day, every single day. Like the rest of these biomechanics folks, therapists, doctors, whoever, they're going to teach you a lot of stuff for very specific parts of the body, and I don't want to do that. I want you to go to them for that. What I want to give you is the strongest version of your system as a whole. I want to help you develop the strongest system of the strongest ability for your body as a whole piece, a whole structure. And that's what we do. The rest, the details, there's just smarter people for that. Plain and simple.
So one could call foundation training like integrated corrective exercise. It's not only going to help, with your back pain, but it's going to help you,
it's going to help you brush your teeth better.
It's going to change your structure so you move better. All of your movement patterns are going to be improved.
It's going to help you walk up a hill better, walk down a hill better, ride a surfboard better, ride a bike better, drive your car better. It's going to make the center structure of your body more close to balance. And much more important than balance is tone and strength and muscles working together to support your frame. And when that happens, everything you do improves. Plain and simple. Your body's working more as a body than as like a a thing, a bag of bones that's just resting on itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I kind of want to get a little technical here. A lot of what you talk about is, in regards to the hip, is that it's a hinging joint. And people are just not hinging properly from their hips, right? They're more likely to like flex their lumbar spine, round. And a lot of what Eric teaches through foundation training is keeping like a neutral spine, but learning how to hip hinge, right? So how important do you think hip hinging? I mean, I know after reading your book and watching your DVD course that you're that's something that you're very adamant about teaching people. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, where do people go wrong with hip hinging? Is it what I just said? Do they tend to like flex from their lumbar spine or their thoracic spine, or like, do you find that people are missing like hip flexion? They can't like hip hinge properly, or what do you see most commonly dysfunctional in your athletes that you work with occurring at the hips?
That's actually an easy one, and it's something that blocks hip hinging, which is external rotation of the femur head, which actually, for anybody who knows and has kind of gone deep into anatomy in some way, shape, or form, the head of the femur inserts into a little dish called the acetabulum, and it's kind of just in there, and it's not a really snug fit. It's just in there. It's ball and socket. The ball is the head of the hip joint. The socket is the acetabulum, and when you externally rotate your femur, the thigh bone, it draws your weight forward into the front of the hip joint. So one of the most common areas for degeneration in the body is the front of the hip joint, and it's because of this reason, the same reason people can't hinge very well. When your body goes into external rotation at the femur head, it shortens the glute tissue, the butt muscles. They're external rotators. Mm-hmm. If your hips are already externally rotated, they're tight already. They're short.
Yes.
A hip hinge requires what's called eccentric loading of the glutes, meaning the glutes get longer as the tailbone pulls back behind the femurs and the hip joints hinge. There's a lot of rotation within the hip joint that has to occur for a straight forward and back hip hinge to happen. Something called, I'm going to pause for a second, I want everybody to catch up. Don't externally rotate your femurs. When you sit too much, they externally rotate. It stops you from hip hinging. The corrective measure to help you hip hinge is called internal circumduction, which is just a fancy word for internally rotating or inwardly rotating, not your knees, but your hip joints, the femur head, all the way from the arches, up the inside of the leg, up the adductors, up into the iliacus muscle, into the femur head. When you do that correctly, it uniformly disperses pressure from the head of the femur across the walls of its joint in the acetabulum. You get less labral tears.
How is somebody to do that? Activating the adductors?
Sort of. We have a process called anchoring. Our second principle in foundation training is anchoring the pelvis. What anchoring the pelvis does is strengthens the pelvis into internal rotation. It allows the arch muscles to be pulled upwards from the inside muscles along the leg, the adductor, the posterior tibialis. All of these muscles have a fascial pull that lifts the arch towards the pubic symphysis at the center of the body, the center of gravity. Mm-hmm. That's how your arches stay up. That process is so integral to hip hinging, so integral. If your iliacus muscle is not communicating with your adductors, which are not communicating with your arches, so they're not staying tight together, that inner lining of your thigh, all the way down the foot to the inner lining of the foot, is not communicating, it's going to be very, very challenging to have a hip hinge. Instead, your hips are going to stay very rigid. You're going to get a lot of sacroiliitis, SI joint pain. You're going to get a lot of piriformis syndrome, and your lower back is going to become your fulcrum of movement. So the hip joints that should have the largest, or second largest anyways, range of motion in the body become extremely limited. They get pushed under you, like you're pushing your junk forward. It's not a good position. We're the only animals in the world that do that. You got to pull it back behind you. You got to lift the tailbone away from you.
Interesting.
Now, the trick is, and this is all so confusing on podcasts. This is my one issue with podcasts, is I just want to say, look at my videos.
Yes.
Watch what I'm talking about in action. Feel it in your body. The words get so mashed up after a while.
Yeah.
But to return to it, internal rotation of the hip joint is absolutely key in our modern society for hip hinging.
Yeah.
The way that we teach that in foundation training is through exercises that promote pelvic anchoring, strengthening that entire chain of muscles from the arch up to the inside of the leg, up to the pubic symphysis, the central pulley of our body. What it shows is that if you do have problems hip hinging, if you do have problems with anterior or posterior pelvic tilt, if you have problems with hyperextension at the spine, the only way to correct them is to create a stronger downward pull at the base of the pelvis and a stronger upward pull at the torso. That counter force, upward from the pelvis up, downward from the pelvis down, that co-contraction is what allows the spine to stay strong enough to battle tight hamstrings and maintain a strong hip hinge and a strong posterior chain. That exact same lift of the torso and expansion of the rib cage is what stops us from hyperextending our spine when we lift the tailbone. It's what allows us to use a neutral spine throughout the hip hinge. And it's the hardest thing I've ever had to explain in my life, and I've been doing it every day for about 8 years. And it's just a tough thing to get. If you don't immediately get hip hinging, it's a tough thing to get, but it's a really worthwhile effort to learn it. There's some important stuff in the world. You gotta eat, you gotta have air, you gotta have water, you gotta have shelter, and you have to be able to hinge your hip joints, because if you can't, you're degenerating every movement you make.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's interesting about the external rotation thing. If you're stuck there, you know, how many people sit with like externally rotated like legs, or they stand with like duck feet? A lot of people, I would assume, are just missing internal rotation, like capacity at their
Well, you have to
hips.
think of it as it's a complacent adaptation, meaning it's something that we adapt to stimulus all day long, physically, mentally, all of that. There's this idea of neuroplasticity and an idea of bioplasticity, and they both are so real. Your nerves and your body adapt constantly. We have to be very active in what we're asking our body to physically adapt towards.
That's right.
So if you're always sitting externally rotated, your answer is not to never sit again. That's unrealistic. Your answer is to perform exercises that correct, or at least somewhat correct or mitigate the reality that your body is in external rotation at the hips and forward flexion at the spine for the vast majority of your day. You got to do something about that. You have to. You can't just go to the gym. You can't just go do CrossFit and expect everything to be okay. You can't just go ride a spin bike or a regular bike or go for a run. You're taking a unloadable body and you're loading it. You got to correct your movement patterns. You got to create a body that can absorb load very well, very naturally through muscle chains instead of onto joints. That's
right, man. Awesome, Eric. Well, where can everybody reach you? FoundationTraining.com. Where what's a good way to that's your website, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm usually only reached by smoke signal, unfortunately.
All right.
So it takes a little. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
FoundationTraining.com is our website, and we've got a bunch of free videos on there. We've been working behind the scenes for about 4 years on products that I have coming out next year. Early 2016 is our first launch. Mid 2016 is our second launch. And,
we were supposed to talk about that.
Amazing stuff. Yeah, well, I'm going to talk about it right now. So there we go. We have a video lecture series that's going to become our flagship program. It's a 7-module series that is going to educate foundation training, or people on foundation training, in a way that I've just never been able to capture before. And it took a long time and a lot of people's help to make this thing, but I think it'll be one of the more interesting ways of considering human movement and how to maintain it that has really ever come out. And I'm so excited about this. I've had so many people helping me with this, with all different types of camera crews and artists and just athletes. It's just going to be rad.
That's awesome.
And then that's coming out around March.
All right.
And then in sometime between May and July, depending on the push, when they finish it. My job is done so far, so it's up to them. I got a book coming out with HarperCollins, kind of like, as I'm concerned, the real foundation training book. My first one was excellent as far as teaching a hip hinge and teaching a basic hinge pattern, loading the posterior chain on one leg, on 2 legs, things like that. It's very valuable. And I'm really so happy that people got benefit from it. And I still use all that stuff myself. But the new book is different. The new book is 5 years of effort now, 4 years of effort now on how to bring this into the medical and health world, get it out of the fitness world because it's not where it belongs, and how to get this into preventive medicine and reactive medicine too. And that's what this book is doing. And I think it tells a story that has not been told in health before, or at least in a language and in a version that hasn't been told before.
That's awesome.
And
man.
that comes out like early summer. So that's my I've been working for a long time on those, and I feel like if this doesn't work, nothing's going to work for my ability to educate. This is as good as I can do.
Yes. Awesome, man. Well, I'll tell you what, I thought your first book was amazing, and a lot of my clients think so as well. So I can't wait to read your second one and check out the new products and courses that you're going to be offering. I'm excited, man.
Don't forget that my buddy Peter Park helped me out a lot on that first book, so he's got to get a little love with that too.
All right.
He's just the best trainer out there.
Yes.
So anyways, yeah, dude, I hope everybody checks it out. I hope that people recognize that my effort in foundation training and putting it out there is to help you. I have a lot of free materials, and I always will have a lot of free materials. If something is exclusionary to you, if you can't afford it, just email us. We'll work something out. I really want people to get this stuff and to figure it out, and to have a tool that helps them take better care of themselves. And as you said, if you're really feeling out of hope, if you've been battling something physical, this isn't a depression program or anything like that. This is pain. If you've been battling something physically in your body for a long time and nothing's working, at least try this. At least if you can get with an instructor, that's even better. If you can come through my certification, that's best. We help a lot of people, and I'm really proud of that.
That's right. All right, Eric. So other than foundationtraining.com, do you want to tell people what your social media handles are, or do you not really want to share that information?
I think they're just foundation training.
All right.
I think if you go on like Facebook or Instagram, it's just foundation training, and that's pretty much the only stuff I use all that often. I still do all the social media posts, although man, that crap gets old, so that's not going to happen for all that much longer.
Yeah.
That is a world that is just so weird.
Yeah.
But at the same time, incredibly helpful for people like me. I've been able to make a business out of it, so I'm very thankful for it at the same time.
Me too.
Yeah, right? God, it's weird. There's strange folks on that.
Oh, yeah. A lot of, I don't know. When you get people veiled by the anonymity of the internet, all sorts of weirdness comes out.
I've been called so many names just trying to help people. It's unreal.
Yeah, me too, man. Me too. I can't even imagine the kind of stuff that you get. But thanks again, Eric, for coming on, man. I really appreciated this. It was a great conversation. I think it was very enlightening for anybody that's listening to this that has back pain. Check Eric's work out. Foundation training is awesome. And I just wanted to thank you again for being on, Eric. And we'll have to chat again sometime.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And thank you very much for having me on here. And like I said at the very beginning, I really don't take lightly people that are helping to get my message out there. So it does mean a lot, and I appreciate that a lot.
No problem, man. I wouldn't spread the word unless I thought it was absolutely worth it. So keep doing your thing, Eric.
Thank you kindly.
All right, sir. I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.